everybody? Welcome to the latest episode of the Donovan Bandits. I'm Orrin Phillips,
I'm Matthew Phillips.
and today we are talking to one of Matthew's favorite authors, Mr. John Gallagher. Now, Matthew, what does John Gallagher write?
Max Meow.
Max Meow is a very popular kids graphic novel series, and Matthew joined us for half of it. Then he had to go someplace, so you'll see that in the video. He had to take off to a fair, which he had a good time at. Did you have fun talking to John?
Yeah,
And what's your favorite part about the Max Meow books?
just that he's a superhero.
Yeah, it's a very cool book, and John's a really nice guy. I think you're going to find out a lot about the kids graphic novel market. So here is John Gallagher. I'm Orrin Phillips,
I'm Matthew.
and we are here today with one of Matthew's favorite authors, John Gallagher from the great Max Meow series. Sir, how are you?
Good to see you guys. I'm happy to be here today.
So let's take it back to the very beginning. How did you first discover comics?
Oh, well, that ties in with the fact that when I was a kid, comics could not be found in a school, they could not be found in a library, and they could not be found in a bookstore, but they were everywhere else. So my mom walked into a grocery store because they were in the 7-Eleven, the pharmacy, the grocery store. My mom walked into a grocery store and bought me a big treasury size edition, they were called, of Shazam, or Captain Marvel as he was known back then.
Mhm.
And I already knew what superheroes were from cartoons, but I was just mesmerized by the combination of words and pictures. And from that point on, I was reading comics and then eventually making my own.
I was going to say, how did you make the decision to get into kids and children's graphics novels and, that whole field?
Well, that all goes back to about 20 some years ago. And I had always wanted to do my own comics. I was sending my artwork into DC and Marvel and some of the indie comics places when I was in college and then after. And I just hit a point where I'm like, I just got to do this on my own. What comics are not being done right now? And there really were not many kid-friendly comics or all-ages comics. And it wasn't even that I was trying to do it for kids. I wanted it to be like the comics I read in the 70s.
Right.
So Bone was out from Jeff Smith,
Mhm.
and there were Archie comics, but there weren't many other things. So I created a character called Buzzboy, who's a teen sidekick who never grew up,
Mhm.
and did a 4-issue miniseries on my own and a couple other one-shots after that. And that's really how I got started. I never intended to do just that, but it got such a good reception that I just kept doing it.
How did you create Max Meow and the other characters?
Well, Max Meow came about, a couple different things influenced me creating Max Meow. I was teaching an after-school comics class, and some of the kids, they know just what they want to draw when they come into class. But other kids, they would be mesmerized by that blank piece of paper, and they were kind of nervous. And I gathered them up and said, let's create like a mashup superhero. And, because if you combine ideas, sometimes that's a great way to brainstorm. So someone yelled at, make it a cat. And another one said, a superhero. And another one said, give him electric powers. So before I knew it, I had drawn this thing that we then created a comic for called Captain Cat. And I thought it was just a one-off thing, but I took the drawing home, and my son Will, who was about 10 at the time, he saw it and was like, Dad, this reminds me of Dogman. And Dogman was the thing that got him excited to read. So he actually proposed that we work on a Max Meow comic together. And eventually, I realized we were really onto something here. So it was a combination of young people like you, Matthew, as well as family members. And then Will, here's book one. He actually helped write the first 70 pages of book one with me.
How did you how did you decide what powers to give them?
Well, I told you one of the things was someone had thrown out the electricity, and I got the idea to give Max an electric tail. In fact, I was going to call him Electrocat at one point, and just have electric powers. But somehow it just sort of turned into the classic superhero powers of flight and strength. And, the Electro tail was added on, and with a good heaping of goofiness added in.
What is the key for you to writing for children? Because you don't want to go above their heads. You don't want to go below, their level. How do you keep it a focus point where they feel, they can be part of the story and, writing for that age?
That's a great question. And I get asked that a lot of times by both younger people and older people. One of the things that inspires me is I want to write the books that I wish I could have read when I was, any 7 to 12. And I try to write for that person inside me and not, some people actually will say, oh, do you just take an idea and then age it down? And I never really do. I mean, a lot of the books that I have, and Matthew, you've read some Max Meow. I mean, I talk about the multiverse theory in one of the books. Another one, I talk about a tesseract, which is an object that's bigger on the inside than the outside. So there's physics things and science things that excited me as a kid. And I just wanted to share them with the readers. And I didn't care how old they were, but it's my responsibility to write it in a way that's accessible. And that's probably the trickiest part, but I love that challenge.
And that's one thing I really appreciated reading the books with Matthew is that there is a focus on science. There is a focus, even on mathematics too. It's not heavy-handed, which I think, if you do that too much, it might turn kids off, but it just becomes part of the story. Why is that so important to you to make educational aspects in the book and make them fun for children?
Well, it goes back to the comics that I read as a kid,
Mhm.
because a lot of them were reprints. But if you look at the first appearance of as they call him, the Silver Age Atom, Ray Palmer, that's the comic story that introduced me to the concept of stalactites and stalagmites.
Mhm.
And there's even a scientific or an idea of there's a G in stalagmites. So that means G for ground, and stalactites, C for ceiling. And it stuck with me. So I kind of always loved when I would learn something that made me, smarter that I
Right.
could share with someone. "Well, I learned that in comic books." So I kind of always want that to be something that other readers can pick up too.
How do you come up with the ideas for your stories?
The main way that I will do it is I usually create the characters first, and then I try, like for Max, he's a character that wants to be popular. He's a podcasting cat at first. And then he gets these superpowers and he says to himself, like, I'm thinking, now I'll be really popular. And then I try to think, like, okay, that's the world he's in. Now, what's the worst thing I can do to him? What's the hardest thing he can have to deal with? And that's in the first book, especially everybody thinking he's a big goofball. And then he has to get past that and sort of realize, like, well, some of this is my fault. And some of this is someone's trying to make me look bad. And I just often try to uh, think about things like that. But the other trick is I read a lot and I've read a lot of comics, but that made me love all types of reading. And sometimes I'm inspired by other things that I've read uh, and want to create those same sorts of stories, but I want to do it in my way. So it's often inspired by other things I've read or watched, but I know if I add my own twist to it, it'll be different.
When you're doing these books, is there like an arc already in your mind, a larger arc, and you just break it down book by book, or is it you focus solely on this is how this book's going to go, stop, this is how this book's going to go? What's your process like when it comes up with these stories?
Right. And it's a tricky part of the process because I try to write the Max Meow books in such a way that you can pick up any book and you'll kind of understand what's going on. There's always a synopsis at the beginning that gives the origins of the characters. But at the same time, there are some progressions that go through the books. Like there's a couple characters that start off as bad guys, but by the end of, say, the fifth book, they've decided being a good guy is more fun. And a lot of that will come from just doing the main story, but the characters will start to define themselves as it goes along. So I don't, I might have the ideas for an arc, but it's never quite planned out. It's more organic because I want to tell a good book, a good story within one book, and the characters kind of progress as we go along. And it just, after a while, it seems logical that this guy will do this and this woman will do this.
Who or what inspired you to be a writer and an artist?
Well, a couple different things. One was I mentioned that I loved superhero cartoons, or I was watching them. The Super Friends cartoon show was on when I was a kid. And what I didn't know at the time was all the artists that work on cartoons are these great people that come up with ideas. And I found out later that all the designs for Super Friends were created by an artist named Alex Toth. And Alex Toth was one of my big influences without me even knowing his name. The other one was Jack Kirby. And Jack Kirby, you know, co-created the Fantastic Four and Captain America and so many others. And it's funny because my style when I was drawing superhero comics, Buzzboy, was closer to a combination of the two of those. And then I eventually progressed to have my own. But the one other big inspiration was, remember I told you my mom bought me that comic. Well, she's also the one that got me to start writing and drawing because I had read all my comics, as I put it, a million zillion times, and I wanted more comics. And she was really busy being a mom. She was cooking. She was taking care of my brother and sister, and she didn't have time to get me more comics. So she handed me a pencil and paper and was like, well, you like these stories. Why don't you tell me what happens next? And I think that just inspired me. So I like to say it's my mom's fault.
Which is your favorite Max Meow book?
Oh, that's a hard one. It's usually whichever book I'm working on at that moment. Uh, but I really, really enjoyed Donuts in Danger, the second Max Meow book. And that's the one I actually have a multiverse. I explain the multiverse theory, which is something, you know, it pops up in comics now a lot and in movies. And at the time when I was like 8, I read an issue of The Flash, and it explained there were multiple Earths, and it made complete sense to me. And I was just, you know, a young person. So I have an alternate Max who's named Sam, XAM instead of MAX. And I just had a lot of with the opposites and doing things. I even have like I love to pull from things that aren't related to comics. There's a segment in there that's inspired by a Marx Brothers movie, which is a really old group of comedian brothers who made some really funny movies.
I would say, because you're doing the art and you're doing the writing, what do you plot out the story first, or do you do the think of artistically first and then put in, you know, the dialogue? Which do you do first in order to get the ball rolling?
Well, I start off with a really small plot. I write maybe a paragraph where I describe what's going to happen. And then I start drawing kind of like a mini comic almost, where I write the words and then I just do like stick figures. So it's called thumbnails. And I kind of do that for the entire book. And I know, you know, it's going to be anywhere from 150 to 220 pages. And it seems like now I've kind of got it down, but at the time I had to sort of make sure I was, you know, making the chapters long enough, setting up the story far enough. And luckily, it's all worked out pretty well. I have an editor at Random House who helps me sort of organize that. But they will look at these thumbnails and the writing and give me suggestions, and then I'll actually start like doing final art. But yeah, it comes with the idea first, but it really is pushed a lot by the art with just some words written in next to it.
You know, it's interesting you say that with the art and stuff like that, because I would just imagine, you know, as you're going along with this thing, there has to be ideas just popping off left and right of, oh, actually, if I did this and this, how do you kind of stay focused and be like, no, this is the story I want to tell, and this is how I'm going to get to that end point?
Well, I often will let those ideas take me wherever they go, because that usually means like there's something getting sparked here, and let's just see where that goes. Because I think I wrote the plot for the first 3 Max Meows at the same time, and the plot for the second Max Meow ended up being book 3 because I ended up with a different idea, and it was all because I watched a show on like the Science Network about the multiverse. And I'm like, oh, I wish I could do a book like that about that. And then I'm like, wait, I can. So I just sort of pushed it aside and just kind of let that run.
Mhm.
Another example, though, is sometimes there was one time I had an idea. I think it was going to be book four, book five. And I had this whole idea figured out. It had come to me so well. I don't want to give it up because you never know. Maybe I'll use it someday. But at the time, my editor is like, I hate to tell you this. There's another book that sounds exactly like that just we're working on. Because my editor works with different authors
Right.
and like Judd Winnick, who does Hilo,
Yep.
and uh, a lot of others. So I had to kind of put that up on a shelf and say, okay, I'll work on that later. And sometimes I will say one thing that really was cool about book two. Originally, there's a squirrel, like she wants to steal all the donuts in Kittiopolis. Originally, it was going to be all the peanuts in Kittiopolis. And my somebody who was reading it was like, a lot of kids have peanut allergies. Do you really want to make it all about peanuts? And I was like, I don't know. What am I supposed to do? Like, because there's a scene with a peanut farm, and I'm like, I can't make it a donut farm. And then I was like, I can make it a donut farm. And that was one of my favorite chapters in the whole book. So sometimes it's what you're not allowed to do makes it something that, has an exciting conclusion.
We've spoken to a number of folks writing these young adult graphic novels, and I think a lot of us think, oh, well, once the book gets out there, it's just going to sell itself. Like you just sit back and it's easy street. But you guys are out there, either Comic Cons, libraries, schools, book fairs. I mean, anywhere and any place you can go to get the word out there. Could you talk a little bit about, that aspect of the business?
Right. Well, it is one that goes along with being a creator. Not every creator is comfortable with it.
Mhm.
Some people really don't want to go out and meet people. They love to just create their art knowing that it entertains people. I'm someone who loves to, be in front of a crowd and talk to people and meet young people. Just like I said, I was teaching an after school class. So it's really fun for me to go to schools and talk to kids about how I come up with ideas. Um, but when a book comes out, usually the publisher will send the author on a tour of a couple major cities just to get the word out, maybe places that pick up a lot of that book. So the last book that came out, I went on a tour and went to Chicago, Atlanta, and Houston. And but then there's also a lot of things I do on my own where like that was them flying me places and organizing it. I also do Comic-Con, like San Diego Comic-Con I did this year. I just was at one in Fairfax, Virginia, right outside, not outside my door, but a few miles down the road.
Mhm.
And I'll be up in Pennsylvania next week. And part of that is just getting the word out there.
Mhm.
And it's something I did before I was working with publishers when I was self-publishing. And it was even more important then because some people, comic shops, it's hard for them to know every comic that's coming out. So going to a show, someone might see it, pick it up, and go to their comic shop and say, hey, check this out. So
I was gonna say, have you found that comic shops are a little more accepting now of having young adult publications in there besides, the DC,
yes.
the Marvel, the Image, and stuff like that?
Yeah, I really do. Especially like I'm in the Washington, D.C. area,
Mhm.
and most of those places have really embraced the fact that their young people are going to be coming in with the adults,
Mhm.
and they'll put the kids' books up front
Mhm.
for them to see, and I love that. It is funny though because there are some comic shops that just haven't realized yet that it's a different world out there, and you need to have these people reading the people, you won't have a teenager or an adult reading if they're not reading as a kid. And, like I said, comics were so important to me as a young person and they're how I learned how to read. So I'm kind of snobby when I go to comic shops. If they don't have a good kids section, I feel like there's something wrong. But, I see Dogman, I see Smile, Babysitter's Club.
Right.
Um, combined with even little golden books are just fantastic now. And seeing comic shops with that stuff is just great.
When because you said you've been self-publishing and you've been in this field for a while, these books have caught on like wildfire. I mean, your guys' books are outselling DC or outselling Marvel. I mean, this is the hottest area in comics today. How have you seen this grow in your time in the business?
Well, it's been really interesting because I am a co-founder of a group called Kids Love Comics,
Mhm.
and it was started 20 years ago when we had to tell people that kids love comics.
Right.
And now, thanks to it, really started with some really smart retailers in the comics business, but also librarians
Mhm.
uh, and educators. They were determined to get kids to read, and anything they read was important.
Mhm.
Cross education going on. And it's I was told by one retailer, focus on publishing. Don't focus on comic shops. Focus on, you want a world in which your books are carried everywhere.
Right.
And people will come along. The best business people are going to adapt to what's going on.
Mhm.
And it is a very I mean, I just was in a comic shop last week, and I was so excited because I saw a huge variety, not just of kids comics, but
Right.
I saw an even better variety of adult comics than I
Mhm.
had seen for a while. And because if every book is Batman,
Right.
it's eventually going to wear people out. And I've seen some really great things from Image, from Boom, IDW, and even some indie publishers. Although that's a hard market to crack.
I was going to say, because we're looking also at a time now where Kickstarters and GoFundMe's are really powering the independent comic community. Can you see yourself getting involved in that in a separate project?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, when I can't remember, is it the 10th anniversary of or 15th anniversary of Kickstarter
Mhm.
this year? And I think it was in 2010 or 2011, I did a Kickstarter with my character Buzzboy, another series called Roboy Red with a co-creator Rich Faber and my friend Jamar Nicholas
Yeah,
had his first Leon book,
yeah.
which is now carried by Scholastic. And we did a joint Kickstarter. And it was really, really hard because we spent half our time telling people what Kickstarter was. Now everybody knows. And I'm so glad you brought it up because there are so many great comics projects, and they're coming out from creators that we all know and love, like Jimmy Palmiotti is almost exclusively doing things on Kickstarter, and it's just a great. I think it's great marketing. It's also a great way to get directly to the consumer.
With Max Meow, that's an intellectual property that you have. I would assume, is the goal just to keep putting out Max Meow books, or do you see a bigger picture of cartoons of other products out there based on this character?
Well, I'd love that. I really would because I think Max Meow would lend himself to animation.
Mhm.
I have talked to people in the past about it. So I think it's just one of those things where if the timing is right, that'll happen. If I just keep doing Max Meow books, I'll be very happy doing that because I know that that's reaching the right people.
Mhm.
And one of my big things is I'm already doing this, and if Max Meow can be transferred to the screen somehow and keep the same flavor and fun, then I'm all for it. And I think that's great. And I'm also working on some other book ideas right now to perhaps do, as well as Max, which I'm excited about. But I think if you focus too much on the animation or the toys or something like that, I think it can get in the way of the story. And so I'm just focusing on that. And if other things come along, hey, I'm here for it.
With Max Meow or whatever other projects you're working on, can you see giving up the artist part and just focusing strictly on writing, or do you need one to help mold the other?
Well, I think I'll always have some art connection because even when I've written a couple comics, I wrote a Pink Panther story for American Mythology a couple years ago.
Mhm.
And what I did was I thumbnailed it out and then I typed it up, and I sent them the thumbnails too, and they used that as their guidelines. And I had heard, I think it was Howard Chaykin, who I'm a big fan of his work. He will often do little sketches with his writing if he's writing for someone. So I think I could do that. And in fact, I love the idea of, I actually love collaborating with people if I can. I have some people that help with color and some with inks with Max, but I would just love to work with an artist who's gonna like raise the level of my story if I'm
Right.
writing. So I think it'd be fun, and that's part of the animation world too, is you don't get to draw everything, so you got to learn to sort of hand it off. And I think that would be fun because it is one of those things. You said it. Story ideas are popping up all the time in my head. I can't keep up, and I think it's great, but it is one of those things you have to let go of a little bit of control.
And to that point, knock wood, Max Meow takes off and is huge. Could you see handing the character off to someone and have them do some stories for a bit while you do something else? Or is that so near and dear to your heart that it has to have you have to be in on that as well?
I think it would depend. I think I'd love to always have my hand or be part of the story.
Mhm.
For instance, like John Green, who does the Investigators books, which
Right.
are just great books. He's got a spin-off series right now where he's co-writing it and someone else is drawing it while he does his Investigators books. And something like that, I think would work perfectly.
Mhm.
Uh, it's when you start to not pay attention, it can be dangerous. But I've been going back just recently looking at the early Archie Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles,
Mhm.
and they had a lot of people that worked with Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird working on those comics. But some of the things they did were incredible. It was probably because they were bringing new people in.
Right.
So never say never.
One thing I like so much about talking to the folks in the community that you're in is you all seem to know each other. Like you dropped a few names of folks that we've had on the show, and they've dropped your name, and it goes back and forth. It seems this is a very tight knit community in that you guys sort of are out there helping each other and supporting each other as well. Am I on target with that?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of us got started around the same time. It was like around the late 90s, early 2000s. I met a bunch of creators at different shows, and we were doing things that by today's standards were what we're doing now. They were kid-friendly things. We didn't know they were for kids. We just were having fun telling these stories.
Mhm.
And what's been great about that community is we really are a sort of a team comics sort of mentality. I don't really feel any jealousy between us. Maybe friendly competition, but we're all happy that each other is getting raised up. And I remember meeting Raina Telgemeier right out of School of Visual Arts, and I remember the day that she told me she signed a deal to do this book about losing her two front teeth, and that was Smile. And I remember saying, like, but you've got the prettiest smile I know. And I didn't know the whole story. And I'm so happy that I got to see this success for people. And I certainly do feel people sending a lot of good vibes my way. And I appreciate that.
So let's say one day the big three call you up and say, John, pick a character you want to work on. You're gonna have either a run on it or an arc. Who are you picking?
Right. Oh boy. Well, I have a name, but I will tell you, I did get a call and I did get to draw an Iron Man story, write and draw for a book called Marvel Super Stories that's out from Abrams right now.
Yeah.
And it's all kids creators getting to do superheroes.
Hmm.
But I have to tell you, if I had to choose, like everybody wants to do Spider-Man,
Right.
and because Spider-Man is when you're a kid, you feel like you could become Spider-Man, but really it was uh, Batman and Robin. I just love drawing Batman. That's something I would just be so excited to do. On the Marvel side, I'd love to draw Fantastic Four because I love the family aspect of what they do and sort of the goofy side stories that they would do, like where they're answering fan mail and Ben Grimm opens a package and gets a pie in the face from the Yancey Street gang, like things like that. I think make this the big battles even more special because they're tiny stories. Um, but
Do you think the fun aspects of those comics are not there anymore in the books that are out now?
I think some of them have definitely lost that.
Mm.
I will say that some creators, like for instance, Nightwing, is a special comic to me because Dick Grayson and Robin was the character I wanted to be. I just hoped one day I would find out my dad was actually Batman, and then I could dress up and be Robin. And seeing is it, I believe it's Tom Taylor, is he the writer of that right now?
Mhm.
Like Nightwing is a really fun book. It's also very, it's for adults and things, and it shows that you can have that fun level and that heart to it.
Mhm.
And I think some people have lost connection with what some of these other comics were, and maybe they're just riffing on the dark parts of an Alan Moore story or a Frank Miller story.
Right.
And they've been doing it for a long time. And I was doing fun stories that reminded me of fun stories. And like what's great is right now there seems to be an opening up that there's a reader for every book.
Right.
So I certainly love plenty of, action and horror and all these different kinds of comics. And but I do love when there's a level of fun. Like I'm the same way with movies and TV shows.
Mhm.
Uh, there's been a couple superhero movies, sort of humor or joy,
Mhm.
and those weren't enjoyable for me. So
Right. You mentioned before something that's near and dear to my heart, and I didn't want to interrupt my son at the time, but uh Super Friends. My goodness. I
yeah,
was there towards sort of the tail end of it, but that just pulled me right in. I mean, those were our superheroes growing up. I mean, you had the Superman movie and years later the Batman Michael Keaton, but that was it. Like you got to see the whole roster together. I mean, the stories, if you look back now, might have been a little corny, but boy, oh boy, they really, they made a really wonderful world.
they really did. They did such a great job, and they had multiple characters, and they started to do the thing where they would have little short stories with just two of the characters, which is kind of reminds me of some of the Justice Leagues where they would break off into groups. And
Mhm.
I something I try to do because you want to be able to focus on that sort of stuff, where you get the personal side of things. It's harder to do, it seems, with movies, but a weekly cartoon, they were able to add these things in, and it was always special. I will say I was never quite excited about the teen sidekicks, Wendy and Marvin. Actually, I like them better than the Wonder Twins, but
Really.
I always wondered, like, what do they think we need those guys to like Batman and Robin? Um,
That's a good point. Like if that was the hook to get kids in to see these two, uh, I mean, I at least for me, the Wonder Twins had powers, so they could help out in a
right.
situation. But those two were just like natural born victims. Like for me, like they were the ones who found themselves in the wrong situation, and now everyone has to kind of rush to get them out of it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Batman had the greatest car in the world, but for some reason that trunk would always crack open and they could get in the trunk and ride along and get kidnapped. Uh, so, I mean, I like the fact that it wasn't Robin that ended up getting kidnapped every time, but uh, yeah, that was, I guess that was sort of the Scooby-Doo effect. Everybody, like, there was a year that seemed like every show had a dog added.
Yes.
Wow. But yeah, Super Friends was great. And, Alex Toth, I talked about, he designed Space Ghost. He designed a lot of those characters, and it's his design that sort of stuck in my head for the longest time. And but there was a simplicity. And then years later, I actually sent him a letter on his birthday with
Wow.
a card I made, and I had my characters Buzzboy and Becca, and they were waving and they were saying "Bravo for Toth." And he actually wrote me back and sent me a postcard, and it was very complimentary and very sweet. And he said something that stuck with me, and it relates to Max Meow, which is think more and draw less. And it's because one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of the art now is getting so over rendered,
Mhm.
uh, with colors, and I think a lot of people really like that. So I have no problem, but I do appreciate people like some of the artists who still draw with a more classic brush, like Mike Allred and Chris Samney, and you
Mhm.
know those are the ones doing fun comics that I enjoy from mainstream publishers.
For you, and this doesn't have to be exactly about Max, but blueprint for me what a hero should be. What characteristics should a hero have in your mind?
Right. Well, that's a great question because it's gotten mixed up a lot in a lot of media.
Yeah.
Uh, and, you know, I actually go and talk to schools and I tell kids about that there's a scene in the first Max Meow book where he's gotten his powers, he's gotten his costume, and he's like, I'm a hero. And his best friend Mindy, who's a super scientist, who's really smart, says, Not yet. He's like, well, what do you mean? And I tell kids, sometimes you have to practice to be a hero. Like, you don't run into a building to fight a fire just because you want to be a fireman. You have to go to school, you have to learn how to do it, you have to do the right things. And um, so what I say to the kids is, a hero isn't someone who's stronger than you. A hero is someone who will help you even if they're not stronger than you.
Right.
And that ties in a lot. The modern example that they've shown in media so well is the Captain America from the Marvel movies. Is he Steve Rogers was the kind of guy, even before powers, would jump on a grenade, he'd get up and keep fighting if it was the right thing to do. And
Right.
to me, that's a really important thing. Like, I think, and I do think there are heroes out there. I think if you say there are no heroes, you're not looking hard enough.
Mhm.
But they're not always the people that you think they are. And I talk about teachers and librarians and educators, and that I think they're as important, if not more important, than the doctors and the police and all these people, because boy, that is they have so much unexpected things thrown at them, and most of them just do not give up.
Most definitely. How do we as parents fight the iPad, the phone, all the streaming devices, and focus back to books? Because I know we try here, and my kids, they love your books, they love a lot of the young adult graphic novels. I mean, thank goodness for you guys, or else it'd be really difficult. But how do we as a culture get kids back into literacy?
Well, it is really important, and there are so many distractions out there. And I think part of it is setting a good example ourselves. Like, my kids see me read a lot, although I hit a point where I started to read books on the iPad because I could reverse the text out and not keep my wife awake at night with like a little lamp. Uh, as far as kids go, it ties into me for me with there's lots of different types of learning out there. So my son Will, I talked about how he liked Dogman. Well, the reason he liked Dogman is we didn't know at the time Will has dyslexia, and he hated to read because the letters and the words would float around the page. And Dogman was the first thing he saw. It was it looks like it's a handwritten font, and that's apparently easier for people with dyslexia to read.
Okay.
So it became this thing that worked for him. But then when I tried to get him to read other books, he was still having issues. And for some reason, he could read a graphic novel on an iPad easier than in print. And I don't know if it's because he was used to screens or
Right.
what, but eventually he just wanted the books.
Mhm.
But and I think that's a big part of it is meet them where they are, which is okay, you like iPads, here's a book on an iPad. You can read a book on the iPad, just don't play the games right now.
Right.
And but it's a lot of it is sort of, if you read for an hour, then read for 15 minutes, then you can do this for 15 minutes. I think that is threats and bribes in a way, is one of the things every parent's tricks.
Mhm.
Somebody told me that, and I was horrified, but my kids were little, and now that I have three grown kids, I understand what he's talking about. But and then you just hope that they'll find that thing. Like, I think everybody has a book out there or
Mhm.
a style of book, but it's never quite clear. Like,
Right.
my first two kids liked graphic novels, but my third child loved graphic novels, and part of it is because he got excited to read. So he reads Amulet, he reads, and he loves the fact that I know these people too.
That
That's really,
helps.
yeah, and it's tricky because I make sure to talk to people about that when I go to these schools and libraries, because there are kids sitting in that audience who are thinking, I hate to read, and
Right.
it's a very real thing. So I try to focus on the fact that they don't like reading over the fact that they like to play Mario Kart.
Exactly.
Uh, but also it's like setting, it's a tricky thing, but setting limits is
Mhm.
a really important thing. And my wife grew up where you couldn't read at the table at dinner, whereas I was like, you could read. If you were reading, you could do
Right.
that at dinner. You couldn't listen to music. So we would have a special night called comic book night. And I'd go to the comic book store and I'd bring comics home. And the kids would go, comic book night. But what they're really excited about it was Greek gyro night because we went to the Greek restaurant and picked up food. But it turned into a thing where all these kids really started to enjoy. They connected reading with a fun thing. So I don't know if I answered your question, but there's a couple solutions in there.
Do your kids now realize how cool it is that their dad is the author of these books that have, become so near and dear to so many people's hearts?
Yeah, I think I've been lucky because my family has always been really respectful of it.
Mhm.
A couple times, there were times where my daughter would be like, you know how sometimes authors will go to schools and talk and share, and then they point out their kid, and she's like, "Don't ever do that to me." But then later, she was excited because her friends are like, "Your dad draws comics," because her friends love that stuff. And a lot of them, since they were babies, they've been coming to the comic book shows.
Right.
My mom would come and sit behind the table and watch them while I'm selling, and they kind of just became part of who they were, and they would see people just say the nicest things and
Yeah.
meet kids who'd say, I didn't like, I actually have had I didn't like to read, but Max Meow was the one that did it for me.
Right.
And that's really exciting.
That's awesome. So
So
what
yeah, they're great. And my wife was a big part of that, making sure they appreciate not just that I do comics, but that I'm doing something I love.
exactly. So what are some new projects you are working on right now?
Well, so I just did book 5, Attack of the Zombies, just came out last fall. Book 6 of Max Meow is at press right now. It's called When Pancakes Go Bad, Really Bad. And uh, there's a guy with a monster ray who blasts things and they turn into monsters, and his name is unsurprisingly Monster Ray. And he at one point zaps a stack of pancakes that attacks the city, hence the name When Pancakes Go Bad. And I finally get to draw in my Max Meow books a diner because I've always incorporated diners into just about all my comic characters.
Mhm.
So now I have 2 characters that have opened a diner, and I so that book is at press right now and will come out in March of 25.
Mhm.
But I'm working on actually my first spin-off book, and in book 3, which is called Pugs from Planet X,
Mhm.
there's a character, a space dog named Rex Rocket, and he's part of the canine cosmic canines. And when I created him, it was almost because I wanted to create a character cool enough that he could have his own book series. And so when we were talking about doing the 6th Max Meow book, I was like, what if we guest star Rex Rocket and that leads into his own series?
Right.
And I'm not sure if it'll go beyond one book, but I'm certainly hopeful.
Mhm.
And then uh, talking to Random House and some other publishers about some other ideas that I have some of the ideas are older than Max Meow. Max Meow, I came up with the idea, I pitched it to the publishers within about 6 months, and we were off, which is amazing because some things take years and years. So, but I'd love to go back and revisit some of those things as well.
And we are back. So I think you did a great job, Buster.
Yeah.
John was such a cool dude, and it's really interesting, the when I asked him about why science and education is so important to all his stories. And it's as a parent, I'm so glad that he is putting these things in the books because it helps kids like him and some other kids get interested in science and interested in school. So, John, keep up the good work, and you'll keep buying the Max Meow books.
Yeah.
And that's what we have for this week. So, thank you guys so much for watching. We will see you soon with a brand new episode. Have a great day.